Okay, so let me quickly announce the talk. As I said before, it's going to be about data journalism, and we have the great pleasure to host Yannik here, who's going to tell us the little hidden secrets and tricks of data journalism, kind of. And the cool thing is that he also has a social science background because he studied here in Mannheim. So he's kind of bridging both worlds. And I'm super excited to see what he has to tell. So without any further ado, I would say I'll leave the floor to you, Yannik.
Thank you very much for having me. I first have to admit that I actually do not work as a journalist anymore. I moved to Wiesbaden for personal reasons in March. So I left the newspaper in Stuttgart where I used to work a few months ago. But still, I did the job for quite some time. And it's my pleasure to tell you a bit about data journalism. So I'm going to talk about kind of the basics of data journalism workflow, and also a bit about what actually qualifies as a story in journalism in general and in data journalism in particular. And so the focus is kind of on the story part of data journalism. But I'll also talk a bit about visualization, which is an essential part of data journalism, of course. So actually, my first slide is a question to you all. I'd like to know what you define as data journalism, or if you know any examples that you noticed recently or in the past that come to your mind that you were thinking, oh, this is a great example of the use of data in journalism.
Do you want us to put it in the chat, or should we raise the hand and say something?
No, I don't know if someone wants to say something, he can just unmute himself maybe.
For example, interactive corona virus maps, where you can see how many cases there were in the last 24 hours, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, so actually I will talk about that later too. Data journalism during the pandemic has increased its importance quite a bit.
I almost always think of Martina Schoris and her team at the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and they have more recently also published some interactive articles on Telegram usage and hate speech. And before that, they worked with the corpus of the German Bundestag.
Yeah. Anyone else before I move on?
Well, maybe 538 in the US polling. That's very close to statistics and teaching statistics also.
Yeah, they do very impressive work. That's true. They are a really good example.
I was also thinking about the coronavirus with the New York Times, when they showed how the virus spread it in the beginning, and how it kind of traveled the world, if you want to call it that way.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to talk a bit about my definition, but it's not that much of a definition. It's actually data journalism, or data in journalism, is not that new. So journalists, ever since the field was kind of coming up, they used data in some form or numbers to underpin their stories. But data-driven journalism, like the term itself already says, is a journalism that is actually driven by the data. So they are not simply just a small part of the work or the story. So they are the core part kind of your stories. And a few years now, data journalism became a real thing. It's kind of in the journalism bubble, kind of a boom that came along largely because of the advancing technological developments, of course. So I put there an example of easier web scraping, but that's just one of them. So programming in general, the processing of large data sets, also easier ways of data visualization. These are all factors that led to data journalism become a real thing in media. And of course, it exhibits strong elements of information technology and statistics as well. So we talked about 538 already. So today I want to first talk about where to find data-driven stories in the beginning. And then I want to talk about the challenges of data journalism in general. And I'm sure some of them you will know pretty well as data-driven scientists in that way. My third part is, I call it scientists and data journalists, and it's also a part where I'd like to rediscuss with you the kind of boundaries between journalism and science, and how both worlds can learn from each other. And my last 3 points are pretty short. It's about common tools in data journalism. Many of them you will probably already know. And then I will talk about some popular examples. I will talk about many examples before as well. And lastly, where to find excellent data journalism. But as I already heard, you already know where to find that actually. So how do journalists and data journalists in particular find their stories? There are generally 2 ways. You can go from the story to the data, or from the data to the story. In the more classical journalist way, you should go from the story to the data. So you should already have your story in mind. And then you would look for data that supports or contradicts your story. In the last part, you would need to probably reconsider. But that would be like the prime way. But that's not always how it works in day-to-day work. So that would be the second part, going from the data to the story. It's in most cases the easier way, because you find a data set that's interesting, and you try to find the story in the data. Maybe there's no story, and that can happen as well, but it's in most cases the easier way. And so the meme I put there, I think it sums it up pretty well. Also, the work of data journalists, and probably of scientists as well, that you have a good idea and you try to look at the data and it's not working. So that's also a very important part, or like a common part in data journalism work. But anyways, I recently found a quote that sums it up really well. It's by Kayleen Barr, data projects editor at The Guardian. And she wrote, "You should almost be able to read the story without having to know that it comes from a data set." So that already points to kind of the focus on relevant stories, and especially stories that are relevant for your readers. That should be the focus of journalistic work. So data journalism is still journalism. So in all the data journalism workflow, you can never forget the basics of journalistic work. So keep in mind that you're writing and analyzing for your readers. You need to know who your readers are. And nowadays, we have usually a pretty good estimation of what the readers like to read, and mostly, and that's the case for data journalists and for normal journalists, is that you keep it local. So you need to work out how in which way your readers are actually in the focus of what's going on, of the problem, for example, or yeah. So the second part is you need to work a story that's relevant for society, and you need to explain in your text, in your analysis, why that is the case. So that's kind of the part where you will pull your readers into your text, and that's a part that's actually often underestimated in my view. So many texts or many analysis I read, I don't get why it actually matters. So that's something that's really important for journalists and for data journalists especially. You need to draw readers' attention. I already said that, and that works by being close to their lives. So talk to people, and that's also how you would find stories that people are interested in. And of course, you need to fact check as much information as possible. That's the case for data sets as well as for every other part of your story. And you need to think of a headline while doing your project. So if you're analyzing a data set that you find interesting, you always have to ask yourself, what could be the headline of my analysis? Yeah, you can't just analyze anything and then just write it up and that's it. So you need to think about what's the headline, what will pull your readers into your text. But of course, you cannot mess with your data. That's, like I said, if the data won't support your story, you need to reconsider. And lastly, think of who your audience is. And discuss your stories with your colleagues as well. The part of thinking of who your audience is really crucial, because many readers, many people do not have a lot of time to read your stories. So that will determine a huge part of what you're doing. And I want to give my first example here. That's a text. It's in German, unfortunately, but it's a text that or an analysis I did. I think, when was it? Yeah, in 2019. So I was talking about relevance. So I wanted to know how many children underneath the age of 3 actually have a place in a kindergarten. So in Germany we have a guarantee that you need to get such a place for your child, but we kind of knew that we don't have enough spaces. Yeah, so that was something that we kind of knew, but not like supported with data kind of. So I wanted to have the data on that, and that was actually a difficult story, because apparently some state how do you call that, they don't want to tell you, so they are arguing with kind of privacy. I didn't get why, so that was a really it was a bit difficult, but in the end I got the data from by basically calling all local authorities and asking them for them. So that actually worked, but I don't want to get too much into that. I just want to underline that that's something that is really important for many people, for their lives, for their children. Many people talk about it, so that's kind of the relevance part of what I was talking about. So when we're working a story with data, there are some things that you have to keep in mind. First, you should know the questions that you want to ask the data. That's basically the kind of headline part. So you need to know which way you're going, more or less. Ideally, you do that before you get the data, but like I said, that's not how it happens in day-to-day work, because you cannot kind of decide which variables you'd like to have, and then someone will just provide them for you. That's not how it works. What's also important to know is what you should not find in there. So if you know that there might be some problems arising, and something not being reported, I don't know, you should know that before, so you can look for it and notice when it's not there. The other parts on my slide are basically kind of hints on how to do basic data stories. Yeah, you can, if you have a data set on a given problem, you can count something, total something, and always put your numbers in context, for example, by proportion. Yeah, you can do international, intranational comparisons, or if you're working at the local newspaper, you can do comparisons with the surrounding areas. That's always something people are interested in how well is their city or their town doing in relation to the others. You can show and analyze change over time. That's also kind of easy way to do a story with data. And you can transform the data to change perspective. And I found a really great example on the put numbers in context part that I want to show you. I don't know, maybe someone already saw. It's from the Washington Post, and they put the number of COVID-19 deaths into perspective. So they show you in a very cool visualized way how many people actually died. So it's not an abstract number anymore, so you can already relate to how many people these are. This is like you can scroll a lot to get how many people have died in the US. So that's a cool way to put things into perspective, to move the story closer to the readers. So it's not abstract anymore, so they can really grasp what's actually going on. Next is the part on the challenges. So there are a lot of challenges. I already talked about that a bit, but I kind of split it up into 5 parts. The first one being getting the data. So where do I find data in the first place? There are many ways you can do that. I worked a lot with open data. I'm saying in a broad sense, because I would also describe all the public state-owned data as open data in that way, because it's publicly available, and it's also very reliable if you're taking data from the National Bureau of Statistics, for example, or of state. You can pay for data. That happens sometimes too. I mean, newspapers and media outlets in Germany don't have too much money in most cases, so it's for journalists it's kind of hard, but that happens sometimes. You can collect data yourself. You can. It's also a bit hard because then you run into issues with whether they are representative or not. I have one example here, which is a really great example. It's an example by Süddeutsche Zeitung, and they actually did a survey, a really broad survey amongst their readers. That's the downside of it, to do an analysis on the renting market. So they asked really a lot of people on their income and rent, and so they get a kind of a grasp of what's going on in the rent market. And that's a really cool way, but it's also really really difficult to do that, and you need a lot of resources for that, of course. And then you have the downside that it's, of course, not a representative sample. But it's a way you can actually find data for your stories. And lastly, you can scrape data. Of course, you can scrape them from the internet. And oftentimes, at least in my case, I had to kind of scrape data from PDFs that were also provided by official state-owned institutions. That is one example I did with colleagues on kind of open data. So we were just like the basic idea was to show and display the kind of open data that we have in Baden-Württemberg, in the state where I used to live, and to show how it's like distributed spatially, and how it changed over time. So there was a slider, and you could do that with a lot of stuff, like how many cars people own, how many they drive, commuters, how many people live in what areas, and how that's developing, and also about elections. So that was a huge project that we did, only based on open data. Second example, that is actually an example of how hard it is to get data sometimes. So in Germany, we have a kind of a bonus that supports people who want to buy an electric car. And I wanted to know how well is that doing. And also the government had the objective to have 1 million electric cars on German streets by 2020. And I wanted to know, did they actually manage to do that? So that's also kind of, again, the relevant part. Did the government do well with their policies, or did they not? So there's also kind of public data by the institution that pays these actual bonuses, but it's only available as a PDF. So every month they publish a PDF with the numbers, and then they delete all the previous ones. So there's always only one PDF, and it's a really ugly PDF as well. So I had to write a lot of R code to get that from the PDF in a nice way, which is really insane, because they could just publish that as an Excel or CSV. That would be perfectly fine, but yeah, they don't do that. So yeah, that's maybe also an example on how the proportion of work that is going into your stories is sometimes a bit distorted, because the actual writing of the article and making the graphics did not take as much time as it did to actually get the data. So that was really the biggest part of it, to extract it from the PDFs, which is really, yeah, it's really stupid. The second challenge for data-driven journalism is data quality. That's something scientists are very concerned about, and journalists, data journalists should be too. So something that many data journalists have to ask themselves repeatedly is, what was the data generating process? So where do my data come from actually? So I talked about that before. If you do a kind of a survey amongst your readers, you know where it's coming from. If you use public data from state institutions, you probably know that they are correct. But there are a lot of examples where you don't really know what's the data generating process. That's really something that you need to look out for. Also, who collected it? It's really important question. Second thing is if they actually represent what is important for my story. So that's kind of the operationalization part of data journalism analysis. So what do these numbers actually say, and do they say, or do they support what I'm trying to say? And of course, whether they are wrong data, like mistakes that happens frequently. So you need to check for that, need to double check for that, and also talk to colleagues about that. That's always a good thing. And lastly, you need to ask yourself, are there any alternatives to your data? Is there a better solution? So that again involves classic journalist research work. You just need to get a grasp of what you're talking about the topic you're talking about and writing about, to know all the existing data sources, so you can actually have the best available data for your analysis. One example for data quality that I would like to highlight is something we did also 2019. I worked in Stuttgart. We have a huge problem with housing, so high rents, missing apartments, or lack of apartments for a meaningful price. So we try to cover that very relevant question. We tried to cover that with the part with rents, but that turns out to be really difficult because there's no database, nothing you can rely on if you want to know what people actually pay for the rent. So that's why Süddeutsche Zeitung actually did a survey in the end. And what we then found was data on house and house sales. Yeah? So it's in Germany, actually, every time someone sells their apartment or house, that gets registered in with the city you're living in, and you can get the data. So that's what we did, and that helped us to just show basically how insane the price per square meter increased in 10 years. It's really simple visualization, but you can see in Stuttgart Mitte, which is the central part of the city, an insane increase in prices, and both for already existing apartments and houses, and even worse for houses and apartments that are newly built. And we could do that actually for every kind of neighborhood in Stuttgart. That was really cool. So And also, this is a database that is highly reliable, because it's the official statistics. Every single sale on the market gets registered, so you can really rely on that, as opposed to, for example, scraping rent portals or something like that. That's you run into a lot of difficulties if you do that. Okay, there was some meme, but I have one more example for a difficult database. So some time ago, a news outlet in Germany published a story, a really important and interesting story about how many people actually have an ecological power contract for their homes. And they did a really cool analysis and a really cool visualization. But in the end, the database was only about one of these comparison portals that you have on the internet. And for myself, I find that really difficult, because you're gonna have a headline mostly that tries to explain kind of a general trend, but it's only based on the data that you get from this one portal. So for me, that's not enough to qualify as a story, or at least you need to work out alternative approaches to cover like the whole market if you want to draw conclusions about the whole market. Yeah. The next kind of challenge is data wrangling. I talked about that already a bit when it comes to extracting data from PDFs. But as journalists, as we're working with public data a lot, we mostly deal with the worst possible data formatting. So I think one of the core things you need to know as a data journalist is how to extract data from the worst possible formats. And that's actually still a thing with the RKI and the Corona data. They are like, I just heard from colleagues that they change their column names every 3 weeks or so. So it's really messy, and that consumes a lot of your work time. So it's really helpful if you're dealing with a lot of data. I wrote down big data, but let's just say a lot of data, and you can automate things. So for example, if you have like, I don't know, 30 PDFs that are more or less built the same, you can write some code to extract it for you. That's what I did with the electric car bonus. So that's actually really helpful. So that's why programming skills in general are very helpful for data journalists, and I think many of them are using R and Python in the meantime. And that way you can also calculate new variables, groups of interest, and just wrangle the data in the way that you need it for your story. And you're not just you don't need to rely only on what people or like, for example, state institutions provide you. And also you can merge new data sets to find new stories. That's also, of course, a part of finding stories. I can tell you one example. What we did was there's commuting data for the state of Baden-Württemberg from the Office of Statistics, but only displaying them would be a bit pointless, I think, because you actually don't know how many people live in a certain city. So we kind of merged the data with how many people live in each city, and then just calculated the proportion of people that are going out and going in every day. And I think we found some cities where like 90% of the people living there will commute to another city every day. So in the end, we had a colleague that actually went there during the day, assuming to find a ghost town. So that was a really fun story that was based on this example. I have some more examples on automation. I actually worked at Süddeutsche Zeitung for 1 month in 2019 during the European Parliament election in the team of Martina Schoris and others. And yeah, we did the whole data coverage of the Parliament election in the EU. And so, for example, we had, or one of my tasks was to write scripts that during the night would just create all these maps with the results from Germany. So you could just they would just output an Excel spreadsheet, and you just push that into Data Wrapper, which is I think the main tool in the meantime that data journalists use. I can show that later if you want in a bit more detail. So that was all highly automated. So the script just downloaded the data from the National Office of Statistics and yeah, created the spreadsheets. So that's that would not be possible that quick if you wouldn't be able to automate things. The next part is about data visualization, which is a really important part, of course, of data journalist work. So the question is, how do I actually communicate my results to the audience? How would they understand what I'm trying to tell them? And in that case, and that might be maybe you think differently, but I think that's maybe a difference to the scientific work. Journalists need to place really a lot of emphasis on user experiences. So you need to always think about the people that will consume your graphics, your plots, and whether they are able to understand them quickly. So many say it's the biggest challenge of data journalism work, and I'm sure it's the hardest task. Problem in most cases is that it's highly dependent on resources in the newsrooms, because like the huge media outlets, they have huge or many people that explicitly work for visualizing data, but not all of them have. And so you need to be aware of that as well. Luckily, there are many data visualization tools. For example, Data Wrapper, I already mentioned that. So that makes the task a lot easier. And probably the most important part, along with user experience, is mobile first. So if you're designing any visualization, make sure that it works on smartphones as well, because the overwhelming majority of readers, they consume your articles and graphics on the smartphone, and the proportion is rising. So that is really, really important. So you always need to check if that works as well, because especially if you're using interactive graphics, that oftentimes becomes a problem. And lastly, you're kind of stuck between being accurate and understandable. So of course you want to have your visualizations as accurate as possible, but also you need to make sure that people actually understand what is going on. So for example, I think it's already for many readers is already a complex thing to try to understand two-dimensional scatter plots, which is for most of us not that much of a problem, but If you're a reader and you don't have a lot of time, you just want to like quickly know what's going on, that becomes a problem. So what is something that you want to visualize or don't want to visualize? I think it's always good to have some plots, some visualizations in your articles, even if they are really simple, and you think like it's so simple, I can just put it in the text. But it's like studies have shown that people tend to stay longer if you have some visualizations, because they feel there's something going on in your story. So I would say yes, do that if it's possible, but make sure that the story guides the visualization. So don't put some visualization that's only a really tiny part of your story. That would just confuse readers. But if it's an important part of your story, then yes, try to do that. Some say if it's a bad visualization, then just don't do it. But yeah, I would say do it unless it's confusing. Yeah, I already mentioned that you lose your readers if you're having too complicated visualizations. And again, you need to think about who is your audience and what are their needs. So if you work for a just general newspaper, you're writing for the general public, where you have academics and non-academics. If you're writing for a really specialized news outlet, and you know that many of your readers are really fond of the topic, you can go a bit further. Yeah. There might be some points where you should not visualize data. That's if you have really few data. Yeah, it's hard to say, but if it's really few, don't do it. And also, if you can't show any trend, or if your data don't show any variation, if everything that's going on is very ambiguous, then it might get confusing, because readers can't like put your story and your visualization together, and yeah, that would make them probably quit the text. And also think about having tables, like just small tables, if that's the easier way. Then that's something that you can really do. So some more thoughts about visualization. If you worked on a visualization and you put a lot of information in there, it might also get confusing, or like people need a lot of time to understand it. In that case, you don't need to actually skip the visualization. You can also just remove some parts and make some more visualizations that will also help your text to have more kind of stuff going on, and it helps readers to understand what's going on quicker. Then there's the question of interactivity. So we see a lot of interactive kind of dashboards and yeah, graphics in news articles, and I personally think that you shouldn't go too fancy. Like don't just do everything that's technically possible just to do it. So try to keep it simple still, even if you're doing an interactive graphic. I, for my part, really like this kind of scrollytelling visualizations. I will show some examples later, and you already saw some in the beginning. Yeah. Also, you need to tell the world. So first thing is to give access to the data. So just make the data set available to people, and make social media graphs so you can spread your story already with the visualization. I think that would be a cool thing for scientists to do as well, to be honest. So I really like that. And if you're going interactive, it's always a really good thing to go local as well. So I already mentioned that people like to just search for the area and do comparisons to, like, what's the neighboring city, how's the neighboring city doing, how is my city doing. So that's really something that you can really get the people to really interact, if you make them like find themselves in your data set. One part that visualizations can help you is also to identify a story in the first place. So if you have an interesting data set, just start with the visualizations, just do some visualizations, and you will maybe find something unexpected. You find patterns that you didn't know about. Just make sure, if you're doing the visualization for your story later, to highlight them, to just really annotate and highlight your graphics to show what is going on, because that will help your readers also more easily to understand what's going on. So they don't just need to read your text and then try to find the information in your graph. All right. My last slide on visualization, I think, yeah. So I already mentioned, because you already mentioned the pandemic. So the pandemic really boosted data journalism in many newsrooms, to the point that they even got new staff to help them work, their dashboards, their widgets, their whatnot. But it's a really, the pandemic is a really difficult thing for data journalists, because first of all, you have to avoid misinterpretation of your data. So you're communicating a really important thing, like health. It's about people's health. So you need to be really thorough on that. And also, you need to be really aware of how you're doing your visualizations, how you put things into perspective. For example, some news outlets changed their colorization scale during the pandemic, and that led to a lot of problems, because readers suddenly thought, like, oh shit, it's like really getting worse. But it's actually, like, compared to before, they just shifted the thresholds of the visualization, and that is actually that's something that you have to really be aware of. There was actually a lot of beef between Tagesschau and Bild-Zeitung, I think, where the Bild-Zeitung accused Tagesschau of kind of messing around and misleading people. That got really ugly. That's the one thing. And the last very challenging thing during the pandemic was that you have a changing database. I already mentioned that the RKI continuously changed things, the way they presented their data. You have changing operationalization of variables, of measurements, and of course of domain knowledge. So what we know about the virus changed over the course of the pandemic. So that's also something that is really hard. And lastly, I have one really nice quotation for you from Marie-Louise Timke. She's the head of Funke Interaktiv. And she said, data journalists need to continuously balance the scientific claim of being correct and the journalistic claim to be accessible. If readers need to first read a package leaflet for a visualization, it does not serve the purpose of making a complex topic understandable at first glance. So I would say if you have to annotate or describe or like give kind of this package leaflet for your visualization that's more than 2 or 3 sentences, then it's too complicated. And then you need to think about how you can actually make it less complicated. So I have one example that I did for our house sales story. That was a GIF that I created for social media, so we could share our story in social media. And this with the help of the animation, you could just see how house prices really exploded. So that's something that that is really important to the communication part of your story. I want to quickly, because I think the time is advancing. I'm not going to show this, but I want to show this example. That's a really political science example. I was really really proud about that, because I could really use political science data in a story. So we did that at Süddeutsche Zeitung as well during our work on the European parliamentary election. And back then you had like these huge discussions about which party of which country belongs to which faction in the European Parliament. And so in the end, we used the CHES data, the expert survey on party positions, and actually recreated that, I think in the political science literature, quite famous bell-shaped curve. And we did this kind of scrollytelling thing, because just by looking at this bell shape, you can just describe like kind of the political backgrounds of that. But in that case, like I said, it really helps to highlight and annotate your data. So we started by just like describing what you're seeing, kind of what's the background of the data. Then we moved on to just highlight certain parties, in case the CDU, and just explaining, okay, what's their policy stand. And then we moved on to show, okay, like how far is their sister party away. And by highlighting the kind of factions in the European Parliament, we for example, identified that Fidesz from Hungary actually is closer to the right-wing populists, for example. And that's, yeah, I don't want to go about all of it, but that's kind of the really, I think, easiest way to make readers understand what is going on, to take them and lead them step by step through your story by really simple graphics, helping them visually to understand what's going on. And in that case, you don't even need that much text. So the combination of short texts and the combination of short texts and the visualization, I think that really helped to understand the composition of the existing and future parliament. All right. Okay, I need to talk about that as well. So we have one last kind of challenge, and that is really probably still most the important thing is it's kind of for the writing down process, is that you embrace transparency, but in simple words. So you explain to the reader the limitations of your analysis. You're doing that in scientific papers all the time, but journalists need to do that as well, especially when working with data. But the data story is not complete for itself. Like, remember the quote from the beginning, you need to be able to understand the story, not knowing it comes from a data set. So you need to talk to those people that are affected. For example, in the case of the missing kindergarten or the lacking kindergarten places, You need to talk to parents that are desperately looking for such a space. You need to talk to experts on the field, be it political scientists in the case of political analysis or any other topic. You need to talk to them, talk about trends, effects, because you're still the journalist that is kind of the neutral, impartial part to the story. And they can give some more qualitative perspective. And lastly, talk to interest groups, politicians, to ask for consequences. For example, if there's a problem at hand. And that also helps, by the way, that also helps your kind of headline, because if you have data story that exhibits some kind of problem, for example, again, the lack of kindergarten places, you can just ask politicians, maybe from the opposition, to you can show, okay, there's not a lot of spaces, so what should we do? And they can just have their perspective on that as well. So that's really, really important, and that's the basic part of journalism again. So you're not done with just the analysis. You need to have people talking in your text. You need to put some life into there. So that's already kind of the discussion part, which fits quite well with the progressing time, I think. Scientists and data journalists. I think about that a lot. What can we learn from each other? And these are just my thoughts in a way, and I'd like to hear your thoughts in a second. So we both have or feel the importance and have the importance of a compelling story. So we need to draw readers' attention. We're not writing so no one reads it. So we want people to consume what we're doing. If we're data journalists, we still have that high value of scientific standards as well, because we work with data. So I already talked about transparency, giving people access to your data. That is also a very important part of data journalist work. And also the part of thinking about the boundaries of your analysis and how to communicate them, and presenting and communicating results in a relevant, easy to understand way. So that's, I think, both things that we are both concerned about. And I think the most contentious issue is that some data journalism projects, I will show one later, they reach scientific approaches. Like we're kind of moving into fields that usually are worked by scientists. So how do we explain complex data analysis, for example, regression and causality? Someone already mentioned the data analysis by Süddeutsche Zeitung on the corpus of the Bundestag. They used machine learning techniques. So how do you actually explain in simple words and simple visualizations the results of such a study? That's a really hard thing to do if you're addressing the general public. How do you communicate scenarios, predictions, and uncertainties? So there's a huge discussion going on mostly on Twitter, I think, but it's between some media outlets that were publishing predictions of how the coronavirus spread will go on, mostly in spring. And now that these predictions did not come true, luckily, some people say, you were making a bad job because your predictions did not make it to reality. So how do you actually communicate to people that that's not the purpose of such scenarios or predictions? And my last part here is they need to provide a methodology. That's really something that is really important. Some projects, for example, they published, for example, the Süddeutsche Zeitung Bundestag analysis. They published their stories and then they published a separate article, really long article on the methodology. But what part of your readers actually read the methodology part? Probably not a lot. So what I would like to know from you is when do you feel that data journalists sometimes go too far? Do you see them reaching boundaries that they are not supposed to reach? Do you see, or would you say that some methodologies like machine learning should just not be done by journalists because they are no scientists and they are not able to communicate the results in a easy way? That's really something that I ask myself a lot, and I myself, I'm a bit skeptical, and I don't think that journalists should go too far, because sometimes it might just lead to misleading headlines, misleading texts and analysis, confusing your reader. So tell me what you're thinking about that.
If no one is going to say anything, I can start, because I had lots of thoughts on that in my head. Because one thing that I was wondering is, like, not really whether journalists go too far, rather the other way around, whether researchers should rather go in the journalist direction and what we could potentially learn from them, right? Because we want to communicate our research results as well. And I was just like, throughout the talk, really thinking whether we could pick parts of what data journalists are doing and kind of try to present our results, which are often really complex. And I just thought of a paper that I was writing where it's totally counterintuitive what I did as a visualization. And I spent a lengthy paragraph telling that this is super counterintuitive, but this is the way how to interpret stuff. If we could just twist it around and make it easier accessible, which also makes it easier to kind of sell what we have done, right? So I was just wondering whether we could, I mean, you probably need a whole stats team behind that, because you could never ever like do all these like really fancy things on your own in your kind of spare time that you have as a researcher. But I was just wondering, I mean, there's a trend that people set up shiny apps to communicate results. There's a trend that people, like, I mean, lots of people tweet on Twitter, adding like nice visualizations of their results and stuff, and so on and so forth. So I'm kind of derailing on your question here, and I'm sorry for that. But that's something I was thinking about that.
Yeah, there are some cool examples already. I also know Manuel Neumann from Mannheim, who has this amazing Instagram channel where he's trying to communicate his results in a Instagram story way. That's really cool, for example, and also this kind of making share pics for, I mean, many scientists already go on Twitter and communicate and like show graphs, but maybe actually like not just putting a screenshot from the paper on there, but I mean, of course it's additional work, but the question is if it's worth it.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think there are two hands up. Don't know who was first. Lisa, if you want to go first, because you're the first on the list here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and also thanks to Yannik for your presentation. What I wrote down already in the beginning was that whenever I have these like these data stories, then you usually see this reading time up there, and it's oftentimes like 29 minutes. And then I see it as a challenge to be faster. But I'm just wondering, because you said who actually reads that stuff, and who reads background information, how the data was collected and cleaned, and what's the method. So I think it would be really interesting to actually find out who reads that stuff, because maybe we're just like talking to a tiny researcher bubble that does this work themselves and likes to read it in nice graphics and animate it or stuff, and not just, I don't know, lengthy studies. But then again, I think it's really crucial and important, because I remember when I tried to explain to my mom what I'm doing in my dissertation, and then I gave her this this article from Martina Schoris where she explains word embeddings. Suddenly it became a bit clearer to my mom what I'm actually doing, but then she wanted to learn more about it. and then the explanation of Martina Schoris was published on a blog, and then again it was in English. So I think then again there was this language humble. So it's really difficult to, I mean, you have to sell the story, and as you said, think about the reader, think about the user. But that's so complex because we normally only write for colleagues, and we think that they have some background knowledge, but it's really hard for the general public to explain without being too explicit. But then again, I'm also kind of pissed when they just write in one sentence what they did, and I'm like, yeah, but this is not enough as an explanation. So I think data journalists have a really hard job because they don't really know who they're talking to. So I'm waiting for a study who analyzes who reads that kind of stuff.
I mean, there are. It's difficult, and there's in newsrooms there's this. It's a day-to-day discussion. Because what you usually have is you can see how many people clicked on the story, and you can also even see how many time they spent on there, but you don't know why, and you don't know who that was, of course. So that's really difficult. But there are some studies. We did one at my newspaper back then as well with print readers, actually, where they had like a kind of a pencil, and they would just like mark where they would leave the story. So yeah, it's there are some things that you can say, but there's never a general answer. So you, like I said, if you have something where people can actually find themselves in the data, that always helps. That really helps to increase how many people will click on that and work with the visualization, for example. And by the way, I really don't like this kind of reading time on articles, because I think it's really stupid if to tell people in advance, because for me it's kind of begging, like, please, it's only just 5 minutes, please read it. So I don't really like that. I don't understand why they would do that, but yeah, some people just do. And it's also not, I'm not saying that people only read short text. That's not the case. People do read long texts, even text from 30 minutes, but only if they're really like, if the headline would just pull them in, and then second, if like the first paragraphs would just like make you want to read the story. But then again, we're kind of leaving the data part of journalism. We're getting into the classical journalists work of just writing your stories in an interesting way.
Perfect. I think Anna is next.
Yeah, so I mean, like, as a researcher, I guess, like, I actually read some of the methodology that was published from some of the newspapers, and some were really good and some were really bad. I was doing it for a term paper, to be honest, but anyway, and I think it's always pays off to know what you do and to communicate openly, because sometimes like that's just missing. And like, if you have a question and like the paper or the authors don't communicate how they got their data, then it's kind of a bad image of the journalist himself or herself, and then also maybe the paper. And so I guess like you should know what you do, at least, even if you don't study statistics specifically, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's that should not be the case, that you wouldn't tell where you get your data from. That's fundamental part of your work. If you miss that, then
I think there are no hands up anymore. But if anyone wants to say something, like, feel free. I mean, you don't have to raise the hand. You can also unmute yourself. Okay, I think there's no need for further discussion at that point, at least.
I can then just I have some more slides. It's not a lot left, and I can also skip some of it. But I can talk about a bit about tools in data journalism.
I thought we were just going through the individual points. I was just waiting for the next points.
Okay.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for your talk. I think your line of work is super interesting, and it's very interesting to get this put. Yeah, I mean, this point that you make, where should journalists stop doing things? I'm not really sure if that's really the duality that we should look at. I mean, journalists or not journalists, right? I mean, there are super statistically well-versed journalists that do great work, and they have the background and they really can do it. And on the other side, there are people who write normal, not data-driven articles and get basic statistics wrong. And yeah, this is really something about statistical literacy. And then the next step, there is the ability to communicate statistics. And we, of course, as scientists, are exactly on the other side of the spectrum, yeah, and we might want to explain stuff, but often we miserably fail at that. And I think that is really something that needs to improve in terms of a dialogue. And I think that specifically, I mean, and that makes it a little bit sad that you moved to Statistical Bundesamt, right? So there are people who have this background, who go into journalism, but then, well, again, leave. And I assume that is because journalism is by itself a problematic field in terms of financing, and specifically if you can do R, you probably have so many outside options that again you will get those people again out of there, right? I mean, this is really a super important issue. I mean, not just for journalists or not just for scientists, but also for the role that media plays, right?
Yeah,
society.
Yeah, that is actually true. I mean, they've integrated data literacy parts in the kind of training for journalists. Very basic still, but it's there. And there's also, I think, many young people are interested in that field and like do trainings on their own. I think that's also cool, but it's not enough, of course. And I didn't mean to have the duality between going too far and not being like able to communicate basic statistics, but what I meant by that is that if you're a journalist, and even if you're like have the background and you know what you're doing, like once you reach kind of a scientific approach or level, you do not have the kind of peer review thing. You don't have like you can just publish it. I mean, you can talk to some colleagues, and increasingly, like the kind of journalists, for example, Süddeutsche Zeitung, they in the beginning days of the pandemic, they published their own predictions, prediction models on the pandemic, and I thought, okay, that for me was kind of problematic. But on the other hand, they went to two different scientists, epidemiologists, and showed them what they did, and they were saying, you can do that, and you can do that. So that's kind of the way you should do it if you're even reached the level of doing predictions or scenarios on your own. So that was kind of the part where I think I don't know if that's the thing that journalists should do. It's something you can discuss, but
I mean, that is actually interesting. I mean, when looking at, for example, 538, they have quantitative editors, people who explicitly look at the stuff that people publish and look if it's, well, scientifically sound to some degree. Maybe that is actually a service inside the industry that does not need to be in-house, right? You don't have to have every article, or you don't have to have a quantitative editor at every individual newspaper. But maybe this is something, for example, for a consulting firm that specializes in that. So you have like these 5 people who have experience with data journalism, and any newspaper can send them the article under a non-disclosure agreement, for example, and have it fact-checked before or statistically checked, and then they send it back. Maybe that is an idea, because you don't have to really know the story to do these kind of evaluations, right?
Yeah, totally. That would be a really good thing.
Or you could kind of follow what Catapult is doing. I mean, they're kind of doing their own maps, but what they also do is they kind of sell like scientific stuff in a really nice and approachable way by just like, I mean, not just, but by replicating what they did, like coming up with the figures in their own style. So this could also be something like kind of based on what research has already done, and tell the story that research told, but to a broader audience. I mean, I get that this is not probably, I would always like to do it myself instead of just doing what others have done, but kind of this could also be an option.
Yeah. So we are seeing a lot of good developments, but I think like Mario said, in general, the data literacy needs to be improved, and I can see it's happening, but it's a long process, I think.
Yeah, this reminds me of an article I read like 15 years ago when some journalists said we need more economists and lawyers in journalism, because that is really and less people who studied German language. And I thought, yeah, I mean, if you have if you have the outside option as an economist, why would you take the money of journalists? Yeah, so sure, but that is of course a common problem.
Markus, I can see your hand.
Yeah, hello. Thank you, Yannik, for your great talk. I have a question to your third point about how communicate complexity. And I was wondering, since you were working in such data analysis teams in newspapers, if you have a model, or if you even have data of what German audience do understand in terms of when you show CIs, for instance, in your graphics, or whether it's just if you have an implicit model in your head, which you can tell us and tell us how it's proven, maybe something like that.
Yeah, that's really difficult. I think there's a time before and after the pandemic, because I think the pandemic really helped to people to understand like at least these kind of uncertainty estimates, because you were seeing them a lot. You just like if you I mean, provided that you actually were looking at the COVID-19 data a lot, you would see them a lot. But I don't know if a lot of people do that. So I think in general, I would be quite pessimistic. Like, I mean, even if they really like on an abstract way understand, okay, this is like the range where it could fall, you can explain that to them, but I'm not sure if they actually like in their day-to-day life would really understand what that means. So in terms of the probabilities of things happening. So that's why like if you're saying something happens with a chance of 30%, they are like surprised if it happens.
But you don't see like any jump rates, for instance, that people stop reading the article because it gets too complicated, something like that. If you have a model,
you can't really like measure that. That's really difficult. That's the thing, that you don't really know a lot about your readers and how they're like. You can tell how much time they actually spend on that kind of page. But you can't really tell like when or at which point they left. I mean, I'm not sure, maybe some advanced content management systems can do that. I don't know of any, and I haven't worked with any of them, but that would be really important to know actually. But I think in a few years we will get better at knowing that.
Thanks.
All right. Anyone else? If not, I could just quickly, as a last point, I will skip the last few slides, and we'll just talk a bit about tools. So still, Excel is really important, as in many ways, for you probably as well. So yeah, you kind of need to know that, but I'll just assume that as a basic. Like I said, many data journalists, they know how to program in R and Python. I think from my estimate would be that R is most frequently used, but yeah, Python, there are a lot of Python people as well. But I can't really tell. I mean, people continue to learn that stuff, so their proportion increases. But yeah, there are still also a lot of kind of tools that would help you if you're not programming. There's, for example, OpenRefine. It's a tool where you can just do data cleaning, wrangling, joining tables by clicking. So that's really, I don't really know who uses that. I didn't have the need to do that, but I think it's really cool. There are also web scraping tools that would help you scrape websites, where you could just click the items that you want to scrape. Same goes for PDFs. And then there are, like, most importantly, I can show you some of that in a second, but you actually looked at data wrapper graphics probably for a year now every day. So there are data visualizations tools. Data wrapper is I would say the most important right now. Even 538 actually just recently adopted data wrapper. It's a German company. There's Flourish. I haven't worked with that. I only work with data wrapper, but it works similarly to data wrapper. There's Tableau. You probably know that as well, but I haven't seen that at least not in like a published article, because I don't think it's really like made for that. Some journalists even know how to write JavaScript, which I don't really know how that helps you a lot in data journalism, to be honest. I mean, you can, if you know D3.js or something, you can do the fanciest graphics yourself. I don't know. I don't think that happens a lot. I know that quite some people work with QGIS for geo referencing, geodata, data mapping. So I think that's used quite a lot for kind of static graphics. I don't know how it works with interactive graphics, to be honest, but at least for static graphics, that's used a lot. Yeah, and then there are a lot of resources online where you can just find tutorials for non-programming data journalists that you can use. And a word on data wrapper. So it's basically, I don't know about Spiegel, but I know that Süddeutsche Zeitung, they all their graphics work on all these kind of cool things, work on data wrapper. I don't think now they removed the source, but that's all data wrapper. So you can do a whole lot of stuff. You can even automate things really cool. So for example, I don't have the link right now, but I still have on my Raspberry Pi, I have some scripts running that would every 20 minutes access the weather data from Deutsche Wetterdienst, would put that in a spreadsheet and then move it automatically to data wrapper. There's a really cool data wrapper API package for R, where you could just really automate your workflows really easily. You just take your new data, push it into the function, and it will just update your data. And that's also how that works. Like all these coronavirus data work exactly that way. So you have some kind of server, and you would automate your data gathering, wrangling process, probably in R, and then just put it into data wrapper, and that will just look amazing. You can, I mean, if you're paying for data wrapper, you can even get like the kind of corporate identity look, like for example with Süddeutsche Zeitung. So yeah, and it's actually the kind of plan for the free use. They advanced it quite a bit, I think, during the pandemic. So before you couldn't handle a lot of kind of clicks on your graphics, but they really increased that kind of limit. So right now it's really good alternative if you want to embed your interactive graphics with the HTML or iframe widget on a web page. That's really easily done with data wrapper. So I think that's one of the most important tools, because it's also really easy. So anyone, even if you're a non-programming, non-data journalist, you can just, if you have a really easy, simple table, you can just put it into data wrapper and even rearrange some columns there, and it's all clickable. So yeah, maybe at some point that's for you of use as well. And I will skip that and that, because you already know how to find excellent data journalism. You already told me that. And that's my last slide. Some hot topics in data journalism. We talked about some of them already. Using machine learning. It's still very rare, because it's also really needs a lot of resources, of course, which newsrooms in general really don't have. Automation, like I said, mostly during the pandemic, but also like for example, we used it for weather data, for analyzing droughts in Germany, like where did it last rain and how much. Use of satellite data is increasingly important, though also really low. And sensor data journalism is also kind of a thing. So you would just distribute sensors to your readers. My former colleagues in Stuttgart are doing that right now with sensors for distance, which they give to readers that put that on their bikes, and then just ride to the city, and the sensor would just record the distance that cars keep to bike drivers. So you can do an analysis on that later. Yeah, so that was it for my part.
Thank you so much. That's really impressive. I never thought of using sensor data for data journalism. That's a cool take. I don't know, like I think there's one hand up, Marcus, if you want to ask the question, or was that from before? Not sure about that.
Yeah, it's actually a new question.
Perfect. Great.
Thank you. Hopefully not the last. My question is to you, Yannik, at the end of your talk. How would you say, like, how can we as scientists maybe better reach out to data journalism particularly? Because the way how we work here is we have some interesting research, and for some of it we write Pressemitteilungen. We write like we have some kind of research, and that gets often published. But very rare cases, it's also that the data is shown if we don't provide like a mousepiece ready graphics already. And what we are often lacking are the resources, the time, the knowledge of JavaScript to have like these great data visualizations you have done and you have shown us. So do you have an idea whether it would be a good idea maybe to skip the Pressemitteilungs row and go to data journalists directly and give them exclusives or something like that? How would you say, like, how can we show our data as well, because we often don't show them and we sit on treasures often?
Yeah, Actually, you already said it, so I don't really think I don't really think that press releases are that powerful, because you have to imagine mostly your press department will just send them to functional email addresses from newspapers all around the region or even the whole state. And these functional email addresses, they get press releases 10, 20, 30, 50 a day. And they, at least in my newsroom, we didn't have the resources to check that and always read it and like check if that's interesting. So I would say try to identify those data journalists that work in your field kind of, and try to establish direct contact. And you don't even, I mean, you can give them kind of exclusives, but you don't even need to. You can just tell them like, hey, this is a cool thing. We have these data, we can do this and that with it. Are you interested? So, because it's a simple fact of that it's not just fading away in some functional email account. And I think that would already work. And if it's cool, if it's a cool data set and a cool story, they will be interested in doing their graphics themselves. And when they use data wrapper, that's really easily done.
Cool, thank you. I'm just like thinking, in the interest of time, if there are more questions, we can collect 2 or 3 of them, and then we could kind of close it up. I don't know, like how people feel, or if they're like, I mean, if there are no questions left, I don't want to interrupt any, like, because I think it's such an important and super interesting and super relevant topic, both for journalists and for scientists. But kind of, I do see if people have other like kind of appointments, and I don't want to keep Yannik here in the Zoom.
I just have a sure fix that I need to attend at in 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So this kind of
okay.
gives us a limitation. That's perfect. Yeah, I don't know, like if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and ask. If not, thanks so much for joining. It was a pleasure having everyone here and having a full house. Actually, it was quite a lot of people. Not sure if you've seen that, Yannik, but it was
no,
like
I didn't. Yeah, but thank you for having me, and I'm glad that you were interested in that kind of data journalism thing. And Tim, yeah, Tim, if you want, you can stay a bit after people leave.
perfect. Plus, if you have a question, I mean, you can also ask it now.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have a question actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's more regarding your career. Like my question would be, how did you end up in that field of data journalism? Like, because I think it's pretty like a special field. And how did you came up with the idea, okay, I want to be a data journalist, or at least for some time?
It's quite simple. I wanted to become a journalist a long time, so that's what I like pursued as a career goal. And then I did the bachelor and master's program in political science in Mannheim, and I started liking all the quantitative part of it. And when I then moved on to the job, the whole field of data journalism was kind of emerging. And so I thought, that really combines two things that I like. So that's how I ended up there. And I still think it's a really cool field. It's more personal reasons that I'm not working there anymore, because I had to move to Wiesbaden. But yeah. We will talk a bit further, Tim, at some point.